few nights ago, I got the sad news that John Sykes had passed away from cancer. Tonight, a tribute to one of my favorite guitarists of all time. Welcome, metal enthusiast, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. One of the reasons I started this channel a little over a year ago is I felt like heavy metal and hard rock have never really been given their just due. Right now, we're in the middle of a series that talks about how the Grammy Awards, which are supposed to be the awards for music excellence, have often ignored heavy metal, have often ignored the great musicians, the great vocalists, the great albums, the great groups. So we go year by year and talk about who should have been nominated for Grammys. But even within the metal community, sometimes we underrate certain players. For whatever reason, they don't take off and get the fame and fortune and credit that they deserved. One of those is legendary guitarist John Sykes. If you've been a fan of this show from the beginning, you know John Sykes is absolutely one of my all-time favorite heavy metal guitarists. And quite frankly, despite being on some of the greatest albums ever produced, I don't think he's ever been given the credit that he deserves. So tonight, in some small way, with news of his passing, I thought I would do a quick video tonight about some of those great albums and contributions of the great John Sykes. Let's get started. So it all started, as a lot of the great metal of this era did, in 1981 as part of the new wave of British heavy metal. We talk about underrated a lot in this video. One of the underrated groups that came out of that era, of the new wave of British heavy metal, was a band called Tigers of Pantang. Now, they had put out their first album, but in 1981 they hired a new guitarist, a man by the name of John Sykes. And they would put out two fantastic albums in 1981. Now, the first album they put out is my favorite Tigers of Pantang album of all time. And that album is called Spellbound. What a debut for John Sykes. See, this is when you know this guy has special talent. Very first album he comes out, makes an impact right away. One of my all-time favorite songs also comes off this album, the song Gangland. If we were to compile a top 10 list of John Sykes songs, Gangland would definitely be in that top 10. I still play that song quite a bit on all my playlists. It is an absolute banger from this era. Now, there's a couple of other songs on here. Hellbound is also very, very good. It also would absolutely be in that top 10. And one of my favorite deep cuts off this album is the song Tiger Bay. So if you are wanting to explore the John Sykes catalog, this is an excellent place to start. Now, that same year, the Tigers of Pantang put out yet another studio album called Crazy Nights. I don't think Crazy Nights is as good, but it also is excellent. And it also has a number of very good songs as well. Love Don't Stay is probably one of the best known songs on there. I love Running Out of Time. And once again, a very good deep cut. The very last song on the album, Raised on Rock. Probably, again, that would be in that John Sykes top 10 list for sure. Love that song. Now, with Tigers of Pantang, it seemed like, and we talk about this a lot with the new wave of British heavy metal, a lot of musicians were, finding their way. I know that at this point in time, John Sykes was really interested in joining up with Ozzy Osbourne. Of course, Ozzy had just lost Randy Rhoads, so he was looking for a new guitarist. John Sykes had an interest in getting with Ozzy Osbourne, and I think the band was really like, if you're looking to move on to other bands, we're also going to move on. So this would be the last studio album that he would do with the Tigers of Pantang. And even though it didn't work out with Ozzy, he ended up being in one of the most legendary bands of all time. Fast forward to 1983, and John Sykes has hooked up with the legendary band Thin Lizzy for what ends up being their final album, Thunder and Lightning. A quick personal story that you might have heard if you've been a follower of this channel for a while. I'm picking up all sorts of new metal. I'm exploring the depths of metal in the early 80s. So many bands to discover and find. So I was over at a friend's house, and he had the Thin Lizzy album, Renegade. And he just happened to play the song Angel of Death, which is a pretty heavy, dark Thin Lizzy song. And I was very intrigued. I thought, oh, this is a really good band. I want to listen to more of their music. So just so happened I think it was my mom was going to the record store, and I asked her, hey, could you pick up that new Thin Lizzy album for me if they have it? And so she comes home with Thunder and Lightning. So I was kind of expecting Renegade, but I got Thunder and Lightning, and I could not have been happier, because the very minute I put this album on, I fell in love with this album. If you were to ask me, as we're doing a tribute to John Sykes today, what is the album? John Sykes, the very best album he was ever on. This is it. I absolutely adore this album. Anyway, it's kind of interesting because shortly after that, I went to college. I was a poor college student. I didn't have any money whatsoever. I was barely able to keep up on new releases. I really didn't have any money or resources to go back and pick up any of the older Thin Lizzy albums. So I would say that this was the only Thin Lizzy album I owned for like 10 years. So then when I started, having a job, having money, being able to go back into some of the back catalogs, when I finally eventually got to Thin Lizzy, I started getting some of their older albums, and I was like, maybe I don't like Thin Lizzy as much as I thought I did. And the point of this is, I believe Thin Lizzy, one of the all-time great bands, but John Sykes took them to the next level. John Sykes gave them a heaviness and a riff. They have had legendary guitarists run through Thin Lizzy, but the best one of the bunch, I think it's John Sykes. I think Phil Lynott also was very energized by John Sykes getting in the band. I think Phil and John had some exciting projects that they were wanting to do together. But unfortunately, Phil passed very shortly after Thin Lizzy broke up. And I just don't think those plans ever took hold. But if you are someone who has tried Thin Lizzy before and kind of came away like I did, a little bit underwhelmed, but you haven't tried Thunder and Lightning, that album absolutely is their best album. It's funny because if you listen to people who listen to Thin Lizzy up to Thunder and Lightning is a little jarring to them because they're used to kind of that melodic, here we go. Whereas I came in with John Sykes, so when I go back in the catalog, I'm like, what was everybody so excited about? The last album is still the best. So just a couple of songs on there to if you really want to kind of see if you like this. My favorite, again, one of the top 10 John Sykes songs of all time. This has got to be in like the top 2 or 3 here. Cold Sweat. Ooh, boy, that if you don't like that song, then just don't even listen to the rest of it. That song is absolutely fantastic. There's other songs, Baby Please Don't Go, Heart Attack, The Holy War. It's chock full, folks. The peak of all this, the John Sykes era, we're going to talk about some other albums, but this is absolutely the best, my favorite John Sykes album of all time. He took Tigers of Pantang to new levels. I think he took the great band Thin Lizzy to a whole new level. And speaking of great bands that are about to be taken to a new level, John Sykes is about to do it again. At this point, I was familiar with the band Whitesnake. A friend had turned me on to their double live album, Live in the Heart of the City. And I was a big fan of their song, Love Hunter. I also, at this point, had, become acquainted with a lot of the work that David Coverdale had been doing. Of course, he had been the lead singer in Deep Purple and had, again, been the lead singer in Whitesnake. But when I heard that John Sykes was joining up with David Coverdale on the new Whitesnake album, well, I was intrigued. So I rushed out and bought the album Slide It In. And I was not disappointed, because once again, John Sykes joined up with a band and took it from a very good band to a great band. John Sykes would be with Whitesnake for 2 albums, Slide It In and the self-titled Whitesnake album. And if you were to ask me what is the pinnacle of the Whitesnake career, it would be those 2 albums. Several albums before, several albums after, none of them could match the quality of these 2. Which one is my favorite? That is a tough one. Probably the toughest of any of these. I felt like Tigers of Pantang had 2 good albums, but Spellbound was easily my favorite. Obviously, the Thin Lizzy was the only album, so that was an easy one. This one's tough. Maybe a slight lean towards Slide It In. A little more bluesy of an album. They've got the great hits. Slow and Easy. Love Ain't No Stranger. Standing in the Shadows. The title track. Lot of really good music. I love this album, playing it constantly. So when the next album, Whitesnake, came out, I rushed out and bought it immediately. And once again, right off the bat, loved it to death. Of course, everybody's going to know maybe the biggest hit that John Sykes was ever involved in, Still of the Night. If you talk about a hit that is, epitomizes a band, when you say Whitesnake, people are going to think Still of the Night. Really great song. But they've got some other bangers as well. Children of the Night's very good. Bad Boys. I love this album. And I think that John Sykes was more involved in this album, and it has a little bit more of a John Sykes feel to it. And again, it is excellent. Now, we talked at the beginning of the episode about the fact that John Sykes never really got the credit that he was due. And part of that may lie right here. Because even though John Sykes co-wrote like 9 of the songs on this album, contributed all the guitars on this album, he had a falling out with David Coverdale and was fired before they went on tour, before they did any of the videos. Really, it's kind of funny because I think if we were to talk about one of the greatest videos of all time, one of them would be Still of the Night by Whitesnake. But yet, John Sykes is long gone by this point. So you got Vivian Campbell, Adrian Vandenberg playing the guitar parts. But that was all written and performed by John Sykes. Maybe that's why John again, never really got the credit he was due, because here was maybe his crowning moment, his big breakthrough hit, and he wasn't there to enjoy it. Kind of a sad tale, really. It's unfortunate when you see a tale as old as rock bands, the lead singer and the lead guitarist not getting along, but it kind of derailed John's career a little bit. But do not sleep on this era of Whitesnake. There's some overly commercial songs that came out of this era. Whitesnake goes in an overly commercial direction after this album. But if you want to hear some really good, heavier songs, again, Still the Night's good, Love Ain't No Stranger, Slow and Easy, again, Children of the Night, Bad Boys, there's some real good ones. Go back in and take another listen to this era of Whitesnake. Fast forward to the year 1989. John Sykes has been in 3 bands. He has been on some of the best albums in the history of metal, and has, in my humble opinion, brought about the best albums for all 3 of these very good bands. But at this point, he's ready to strike out on his own. So he forms his own band, Blue Murder, and puts out yet another classic album. Now, by far my favorite song on this one is the epic Valley of the Kings. But there are other songs on here. Jelly Roll was probably the biggest hit off this album. But I also like Telemi, if I'm saying that correctly, and Black Hearted Woman. But again, this album, it's if you want a comparison, it's kind of the sequel to Whitesnake. It's a very bluesy album, but it is also very good. Unfortunately, Blue Murder would only put out 2 albums, and I believe most of the band that's on the first album wasn't even sticking around for the second album. And so, again, the turmoil that is John Sykes never really got that band that could, come in album and, establish themselves. So after 2 albums, Blue Murder goes away. And really, since then, John Sykes has done a number of little projects, some solo work. He's, been rumored to be in different bands here and there, doing projects with other famous musicians like Billy Sheehan and others. But it just never really took hold. And so I think, once again, that's probably one of the main reasons that as we sit here and celebrate this wonderful man's career, you may not have ever heard of him. So rest in peace, brother. John Sykes, one of the greatest guitarists of all time. If you have never listened to John Sykes' music, go back. Then Lizzie, Thunder and Lightning, my all-time favorite of his, but the 2 albums he did with Whitesnake, his first Blue Murder album, and both albums he did with Tigers of Pantang are also very excellent. We always take our rock stars for granted until they're no longer with us. Go out, listen to a couple of these albums, and celebrate with me the life of John Sykes. And that's our episode. This is always that time where I make my pitch to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. We do weekly shows here every Tuesday night. Next week, I had planned on this being this week's episode, but the passing of John Sykes really felt like I needed to put this one together first. Next week, we're going to be celebrating one of the greatest albums of all time, Iron Maiden's The Number of the Beast. You don't want to miss it. So subscribe, get notified, and we'll see you here next week. Until then, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.